Greetings. Today is 5/3/2019, and this video is going to be about the 42 months of when the Antichrist and his minions trampled Jerusalem. However, I got some new information concerning the days of Noah that I wanted to share. It's very excellent information. And whether or not anything happens this weekend, this information is very good. So, I was contemplating Noah again yesterday, and the Messiah led me to some stuff that I wanted to share with y'all. And when the Messiah was talking about the days of Noah, which ultimately is talking about the beginning of his coming, and like we said before, his coming is a 7-year process, which is the time of the seals, or also known as the trial, the time of testing, the time of temptation. Him and his disciples were at the Mount of Olives, and prior to that, the disciples were admiring Jerusalem and the buildings. And the Messiah said to them that no stone will be left, that it's going to be destroyed. This is what the King James says. There shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. Okay? And when they were at the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him and asked him about a couple questions. And the questions were, when shall these things be, in reference to Jerusalem being thrown down? What shall be the sign of your coming? And of the end of the world, or end of the age. Okay? So they're the three questions that the disciples asked. And then the Messiah goes on to explain the seals, because ultimately he's answering the questions that the disciples asked. And he answers concerning Jerusalem being trampled in verses 15 to 28, when he talks about the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel standing in the holy place. And in Luke, he refers to it as when Jerusalem is surrounded by the armies, the nations. And that's where he answers the question about Jerusalem being trampled, thrown down, verses 15 to 28. Then he answers the question about the sign of his coming in verses 29 to 31. Okay, and we went over that in the past, what the sign of his coming is. It's actually a wormhole ripping open, as we see in Revelation 6. I believe it's Revelation 6, 13 to 15, somewhere around there. And that's the actual sign, is when that wormhole opens up. But here in Matthew 24, he's just explaining the sixth seal. Okay? But in verse 30, he talks about that his sign will appear in in the sky, but it's actually space, as we know. In heaven, which is a reference to space. And then they also ask him when the end of the age is. And he answers that in verses 35 to 36. So like I said in the past, like right here, where they have this gap, I don't think it's supposed to be here. I think that gap is supposed to be right here, in between 36 and 37. 36 is connected to 35 because he's answering that final question. Okay? Now the King James just has them all the verses separated, but I believe this translation has the paragraph separation incorrect, and it's misleading. And that was the hunch I had a long time ago. And from my experience, usually when you have a hunch concerning Scripture, it's the Holy Spirit tugging on your heart, letting you know that a translation is misleading or incorrect, or you got to connect something together. And he showed me this yesterday. So now the connection's been completed. And the reason I say that is because he's answering the final question in 35 to 36. And he says, heaven and earth shall pass away. And this is saying this is the end of the age, when heaven and earth passes away. And really, what that really means is they're made new. They're cleansed. Because that's what the Almighty is doing. This 7,000-year process is Him cleaning the earth of evil that the fallen angels did, so He can come down to tabernacle with us. He is not coming down until the earth is clean. And that's one of the main underlying themes in all of Scripture, is this 7,000-year cleansing process. So the Messiah is saying right here, he's talking about the new heaven and the new earth. And it's in reference to the answering of this question, when is the end of the age, that he talks about the new heaven and the new earth. And then he says, but of that day and hour knoweth no man, not the angels of heaven, but my Father only. And in Scripture, all we know is that it's at the end of the 1,000 years. That's all it tells us. And this is where he transitions from finishing the answers into explaining the beginning of his coming. 36 is the separation, and 37 down is all about the beginning of his coming. So he answers the questions, and then he explains to him when it's all going to begin, which is the start. The 70th week is the trial. The 71st week is the wrath, and then the 1,000-year millennial reign, and then at the end of the 1,000 years is the end of the age. And everything is made new, and the Father comes down to tabernacle with us. Okay? So, what I noticed when I was studying this is that the Messiah will say something in one verse, And then in the next verse, it complements it, it completes it, and gives the insight. So he says in verse 37, as were the days of Noah, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. Okay, so I started digging into the Greek. And what the Greek is actually saying right here is, as the days of Noah were, in this same manner, the royal entrance of the Son of Man will be near. And it says near. It's referring to near because it's talking about the days, and we get this from the next complementing verse when it's talking about the days, because up here we have days, and then it clarifies it down here with days, and then it's right before Noah entered the ark. And coming in the Greek is mostly referring to a royal entrance, like the red carpet being rolled out. So then in 38, it says, for as in the days that were before the flood, they were eating, drinking, marrying, giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark. And I noticed that the Messiah only mentions Noah in this scripture, because when you read it in Genesis 7, it says Noah and his household. And I believe the reason why he says that, because he clarifies it in Luke 17:34 and verses 40 to 41 in Matthew 24, is that there's a separation. And in Matthew 24, he doesn't mention spouses, but in Luke 17, he mentions spouses, because it says that two will be in bed, one will be taken, one will remain. And unfortunately, the King James translates Luke 17 pretty lousy, because it says there'll be two men in one bed. But when you look at the interlinear Greek, it just says there will be two upon one bed. The one will be taken, the other will be left. So it's talking about a husband and a wife is what it's talking about. And that's why I believe he only mentions Noah, is because right down here, a couple verses later, he shows us that there's going to be a separation going on. Okay. Then in 39 he says, and knew not until the flood came and took them all away. So shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. Now in the Greek, the interlinear, the word also is only in verse 39. It is not in 37. So as in the days of Noah, so shall. But in 39, it's so shall also. And when I was digging into the Greek, what I got from that is that it's pointing back to this day that Noah entered the ark. So what it's saying is, in this exact manner, Or up here, it's in this same manner. The days, it's near. But this also in the Greek is pointing it back that it's this exact day. So in the exact manner, meaning the exact day, will the royal entrance of the Son of Man be. Okay? And then we come down here to verse 42. And it says, "Watch therefore, for ye not know what day your master doth come." Okay? And now this is what I'm talking about. These next couple verses really highlight what I'm talking about, as in they're being intertwined, complementing, and then showing the insight. Because when you just look at this in the English, you think day. All right, but it is not talking about a day. It is talking about the time of the day, and that's revealed in the next verse. So he says, "Watch therefore, for ye not know what day your master doth come." So what the Greek is really saying is, be on alert, because it will not be known at what watch of the night the master will come. And he reveals the insight right here in the next verse. "But know this, that if the good man of the house had known in what watch the thief would come." Okay, so it's showing us in verse 42. It's showing us that verse 42 is a reference to a night watch. That's what verse 43 is doing. It's clarifying what this is about. So this is not talking about the day. So it's not saying we're not going to know the day. It's saying we're not going to know at what watch of the night. And as you know, in many of the Gospels, he refers to this not knowing at what watch he's coming. Okay? And then 44, we see, "Therefore be ye also ready, for in such an hour as ye think not, the Son of Man cometh." Okay? But then the next verse clarifies to us what hour means. Because if you remember in the past, when I showed that hour in the Greek only means an hour when it's exactly talking about a specific hour of the day. And if it's not talking about a specific hour of the day, then it means an appointed time. Okay? And in this case, season. Because he clarifies it in the next verse, complementing it. "So who then is the faithful and wise servant, who his master made ruler over his household, to give them meat in due season?" Okay? So it's showing us that this hour is in reference to a season, not a literal hour of the day. So what the Greek is saying is, be prepared. The master will come at a season that is not perceived. And for the majority of Christianity, this is true. The season is not perceived. People are, and I'm talking about the majority here. I know there's some that has the insight, but the majority of people are scatterbrained about when the season is. 1 week they'll be saying it's Passover, the next week they'll be saying it's Pentecost, the next week they'll be saying it's Tabernacles, and the week after that they'll be saying it's Hanukkah, etc., etc., etc. And that's what the Greek is pointing to here. It's saying that it's not going to be imagined properly. So you know, when the majority of people are studying the scriptures, they're not going to imagine the correct season. They're not going to perceive it. And that's exactly what's been going on for the past 20 years. Okay? And then we see here that the faithful and wise servant gets blessed, gets rewarded by the master making him ruler over all of his goods. And then we see this fulfillment with the wise virgins, servants, Church of Philadelphia, who are the elders in Revelation, receiving a crown and throne, which is symbolic of rulership, authority, an important position, right? So that is the update. And like I said, whether or not nothing happens this weekend, this is still some excellent information, I believe. And I hope you appreciate it. Now getting on to the 42 months. Okay. The kingdoms of the beast in Revelation 17:10 were passed through the flood via the ancient secret knowledge of the fallen angels. The ancient world-dominating empires came from this secret knowledge. Ultimately, it's idolatry. But it was passed to Nimrod, and then we know that Babylon came from that. So, what happened was, we get a little tidbit of it in our scriptures. But then the Dead Sea Scrolls with the Book of Enoch and Jubilees fills in all the blanks and makes everything crystal clear. So in Genesis 6, we see about the giants, and they were the mighty men of renown of the time in the old. Okay? Now that doesn't say much to us. And then in Ezekiel 31 and a few other places in Scripture, it cryptically explains to us what happened. But if you just use the Bible, it's very difficult to fill in the blanks because it's so cryptic, right? But with the revealing of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Book of Enoch and Jubilees fills in all the blanks perfectly. All right? And this here is what happened. All right, and this is Enoch chapter 7. And this is basically saying the same thing as Genesis 6, that the fallen angels, who in the Aramaic are referred to as the Watchers, because that was their original job, to watch and intercede for humanity in their beginning stages, but they ended up rebelling. So the Aramaic actually refers to them as Watchers. The Greek calls them angels, but they were Watchers, but now they're fallen angels. All right, and this is their leader. He was the appointed leader from the Almighty, okay? And when they were looking upon human women and seeing how beautiful they were, the one convinced them to unite with them and trade humans' knowledge for getting wives. And that's this one right here, this entity. And though this one was the ordained leader, this one ends up becoming the leader because he convinced them and they made a pact, and I guess basically the leadership fell to him. But what happened is they united with females, whether or not it was copulation or gene manipulation, or artificial insemination, I don't know what exactly happened physically. But the bottom line is that they had children between the fallen angels and females, and they were giants. The first generation was 300 cubits, which is approximately 400 feet tall. Okay, they were gigantic, almost the size of medium-sized skyscrapers. And the ancient mythology actually has elements of truth in it, and what it is the false gods of mythology is actually talking about the time from the rebellion in Eden until the flood. That's what was going on for 2,000 years. And that's what mythology is basically talking about. And of course it's fantasized from being passed on and passed on and passed on. But there is elements of truth in it. And this here explains, I think, what happened at Olympus when the children rebelled and killed and beat their parents in war. And that's exactly what this is talking about right here. That the first generation were the great giants, and they are the ones that were 300 cubits. And then the next generation were they get smaller and smaller as the generation goes down, I guess because the DNA gets watered down. But anyway, they're slaying each other, and that's what mythology portrays. So this slaying each other is actually a judgment that was judged against them by the Almighty. So we see right here where it tells us that the first generation, they were almost, approximately 400 feet tall. Okay, and then they devoured all the labor that men produced until it became impossible to feed them. Then they turned against humans. Then they turned against the animals. And then they turned against each other. Okay? And now right here, it shows that the Antichrist taught warcraft to men. Alright? How to make weapons and war, etc. And then it shows the other, and these are the seven heads. And this here one up here, who was the original leader, he actually taught sorcery, and he is the false prophet. So this one's the Antichrist. He taught warcraft, and then where's it at? Right here. This one, who was the original leader and ends up being the leader of the seven because they get separated when they get locked up. He taught sorcery, and he is the false prophet. Okay. So it goes on to explain what happened here. And it says, "You have seen what the Antichrist has done, how he has taught every species of iniquity upon the earth, and has disclosed to the world all the secret things which are done in heaven." Alright? And this is the big crime. Doing this and mating. Because it was unnatural. But what angered the Almighty the most was that they left the heavenly spiritual to be united with the earthly flesh. That's what angered the Almighty the most. He said, you know, you tasted of the heavenly, and yet you chose to leave that for, you know, earth, to be earthly. So this goes on to explain what happened. And then this talks about how the Almighty judges them. And he says, explain to him the consummation which is about to take place. And this is talking about the flood. And that's when they get locked up. And right here we see the Almighty telling Raphael to bind up the Antichrist and cast him into the desert. Okay? And then he tells Michael to bind up the others. Right here. Announce the crime to the false prophet and the others, all of them who were with women and became polluted. And then bind them until the day of judgment and the consummation of their judgment be completed. And then this here explains about when they get tossed into the burning fire. Okay? So it's showing everything that the blanks that needed to be filled in. It's all here in Enoch and Jubilees. Okay? So the Antichrist gets locked up in the desert, and the other ones get locked up separately, which I believe is under the ice in Antarctica. Okay, that's just my personal opinion, but I believe it's a strong possibility that that's exactly where they are, and I explained that in a past video. All right, and then here's Jubilees saying the same stuff basically. Everything was corrupted from the giants and the fallen angels. And he talks about taking away their dominion and casting them down to hell until the final consummation, until the end, their final judgment. Because what's occurring right now is they are basically in prison awaiting, they are on death row awaiting their death sentence to be carried out. And the death sentence is carried out after they're released for their 7 years. And the death sentence is them being tossed into the burning fire. Okay? But what happened was, because right now they have no influence on humanity because they are locked up. The 200 fallen angels are locked up. They have not had any influence on humanity, direct influence on humanity since the flood. Okay? But now what happened was, because when you look at Revelation 17, oh, that's Luke. Oh, here it is. There is 7 empires in reference to these fallen angels. And the way that they came about, even though the fallen angels are locked up, is because that ancient secret knowledge that they taught to humanity for them 2,000 years somehow made it through the flood via one of the family members of Noah. Okay? And I believe definitely Ham had something to do with it, possibly Noah's wife, possibly one of his daughters-in-law. Because when we go back to the flood, Okay, we see right here in Genesis 9, when it talks about the sons of Noah, it'll say Shem, Ham, Japheth, and then he includes Canaan. But he always says Ham was the father of Canaan. Okay? And this is one of them scriptures that always bothered me since I was a kid, because it never made sense to me. I could not understand until recently why Noah was so angry. Because, you know, all families accidentally see each other naked. It's just normal human interaction from living with each other. So that never sat well with me until about 2 years ago when I realized what happened. Okay. The reason why Canaan is mentioned along with Noah's sons, but then he says Ham was the father of Canaan, is because Ham either forcefully was with his mother or mutually doing some type of ritual was with his mother. But nonetheless, Ham and his mother had Canaan. Okay? That's what happened. And I personally think it was a ritual. And this is the secret. And they were the ones probably behind Noah's back, brought the secret knowledge over from the flood. And what I think is probably going on here is that incest probably allows the angel, the fallen angel DNA to come out easier. Because Nimrod was a giant. That's why he conquered the earth. See, here's a carving of Nimrod, and he's holding a lion, and the lion's like this, comparable to a size of a cat. So that would basically put humans only up to the knee of Gilgamesh, which is Nimrod, okay? And the same type of funny business went on with Nimrod. Okay, where was that? Okay, right here. It says same type of funny business. We got the sons of Cush were Seba, Havilah, Sabta, Ramah, Sabteca, and then it stops. But then it says Cush became the father of Nimrod. Alright? And when you look into the ancient Hebrew, because the King James translate this as begot, but the ancient Hebrew for this word is rarely begot. And it leans towards brought up. So basically, the Hebrew's saying, now Cush brought up Nimrod as a father, meaning he adopted him. So Nimrod really isn't his son biologically. He just raised him, is what I believe the ancient Hebrew is saying here. And that's why Nimrod is separated from when the scripture talks about the sons of Cush. Just same type of funny business as Noah and Canaan. But Ham is the father of Canaan. Alright? And I think there was probably some type of weird ritual going on here. And who knows what family members were together. And probably the incest allowed the giant gene to come out better, and they probably knew that from the ancient knowledge. So that's how I think it got passed, and then it got passed on to Nimrod, and they probably groomed him to conquer. And that would be the first empire, because it's Revelation 17 says it's 7 kings, but when you research it, you know it's empires. 5 are fallen, 1 is, so the 1 is would be the Roman Empire. The other is not yet come, which is Babylon the Great, and when it comes, it'll be a short period. Okay. So I said all that to explain why it says this here. It's because that ancient knowledge got passed through the flood to Nimrod, and Nimrod was the first kingdom, Babylon. And then the other ones, and then Rome is the one that was during that time. And then the other one is Babylon the Great, which only continues for a short space. Well, actually, it's the 7-year period. Only half of that time is Babylon the Great, but it's the 7-year period. The beast of the sea and the beast of the earth together. That whole little, it's still only a short space compared to these other empires that ruled the world for a long time, that dominated the world for a long time. So that's why I explained all that, to show you how them empires got, how that came across, even though the fallen angels are locked up. It's the knowledge that they gave to humanity that brought about the empires. Okay? So then in Revelation 17, when it's talking about the beast, which is Apollyon, he says, "The beast that thou sawest was, and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit," or the abyss, "and go into perdition." And perdition means to destroy. So he's saying the beast comes out of the abyss to destroy. No peace. This is destruction, alright? "And they that dwell on the earth shall wonder, whose names were not written in the book of life, when they behold the beast that was, and is not, and yet is." Okay, and the reason why he was is because he was in Eden to the flood. That whole time he was. Then he is not, because he's been in prison from the flood until the great day, which is the 7-year week of wrath. And he is, because he gets released from the abyss for the final consummation of judgment, which is the carrying out of the death sentence. Him and the other fallen angels being tossed into the burning fire. Okay? So then we see the 7 heads are 7 mountains. And this is talking about the 7 fallen angels who taught humanity advanced knowledge. 7 of them separate from from Apollyon. So altogether 8 of them taught humanity advanced knowledge. But these 7 are the 7 heads. Okay? And then the 7 empires I explained. And then it says here, the beast that was and is not and even is, he is an 8th, because he's of the 7, and he goes to destroy. Alright? Like I said, he taught humanity warcraft and how to make weapons and etc., etc., etc. So there was 8 total fallen angels that taught humanity advanced knowledge. But it refers to the 7 as the mountains. Because like I said, or I should say like Enoch and Jubilee say, they were separated. The Raphael binded the Antichrist and threw him into the desert, which I did a video on that, where it's at, where I believe it's at. And then he threw the other ones into the depths of hell and covered them with the deep, which I believe is Antarctica, and they're covered with the ice. And when the burning mountain hits the sea, it's actually going to melt the ice, and that's the natural process that releases them. So that's how that occurs. He's one of the fallen angels that taught humanity advanced knowledge. That's how he is one of the 7, but he's the 8th. All right. And then 10 horns are the 10 rebel angels that didn't mate with humans, but they rebelled after Babel. I have no idea why. Yeah, I really don't know why these rebelled. I guess maybe they think they're going to usurp the Messiah's throne or what, but they rebel. And something... Okay, so Revelation 17:9 is the 7 leading fallen angels who taught humans. 17:10 is the 7 empires that came from the knowledge of the fallen angels. Apollyon is one of the fallen angels, and he goes to destroy. Now, the 10 horns are the Ephesians 6 powers of the cosmos, which is the 10 rebel angels, the 10 princes, and they're led by Satan, who is Gog. All right. So the clarification about the 42 months is, I was lumping it together with the 1260 until the Messiah brought it into focus for me and showed me that it isn't lumped in with the 1260, that it's actually a couple days after, and it ends at the 1335, when the final separation of flesh occurs. Those who refuse the mark get killed and then raptured up. Those who take the mark become Babylon. It transforms the empire into Babylon the Great. The mark is what creates Babylon the Great. So anybody who's trying to say America or the Vatican is Babylon the Great, they don't know what they're talking about. The mark of the beast creates Babylon the Great. Babylon the Great does not exist until the 1335, which is Revelation 14:13-20. That separation right there. The ones who are killed for refusing the mark, they get raptured up and join Israel. Well, they are representing Israel at that time, like we talked about in past videos. True believers are Israel, the covenant. All right. Once they get taken up at the day of redemption, there are no believers on planet Earth. There is no Israel on planet Earth for them couple days. All right. Then when the 144,000 get sent back down, then they are Israel, and they are representing the woman. They are representing Israel. But during their 1260-day testimony, witnessing, many people are going to come to true belief in the Messiah. And it'll have to be true belief because they're going to be faced with death at the end of the 1260. Either you take the mark and live, or you don't take the mark and you're killed. So that's going to weed out anybody that's just with the 144,000 out of curiosity. When the going gets tough, that's going to weed out who's true believers and who isn't. But after the 144,000 are killed and then raptured, the new believers are then representing Israel, the woman, for them final 42 days. And then they join the other believers in heaven after they get killed. They get immediately raptured up. And then the other group who take the mark, they get thrown into the wine press of the wrath, which is the bowls. And then at the end, the Messiah comes down to tread the wine press, which is the war of the great day, which is when he kills everybody with the mark, which is all of humanity. Because after that separation, all of humanity is wicked because they all took the mark. Because whoever doesn't take the mark, the beast kill. All right? But the way I came into this focus is I said to myself, how long exactly is 42 months? I said, now that we know the true calendar is 364 days, you could actually figure out how many days 42 months is. So I did the calculation, and then I subtracted it from the 1335, and it's actually 33 days after the war in heaven, which is when the 144,000 gets sent back to Earth. So, and that makes a lot more sense because the covenant and the surrounding of Jerusalem and all that, it takes 33 days for that to all go on, which makes a lot more sense than it happening in one day, which is what I was basically saying before when I was lumping it all together. So, the 42 months, when you look into the Greek word for authority, it says that the beast was given authority to continue 42 months. That authority is actually jurisdiction. And so what's being said there is that after the covenant, after the thrown down angels give their authority over the 10 nations to Apollyon, that's when the start of the 42 months begins. Okay? And all of these here verses right here are the same covenant, are the same event. The covenant in Daniel 9:27 is the alliance of Apollyon and the thrown down angels led by Satan, which is Gog. The Revelation 13:2 dragon given the beast authority is the 10 angels bowing down, giving alliance to the Antichrist. And in Revelation 17:13 and Revelation 17:17 show the same thing. The 10 horns giving their authority, their kingdoms to the beast. Alright? And horns equals angels. Alright? Because many times angels are called princes and kings and etc., etc. People try to say that it's humans, but it's not. And an easy way to see that is that the 4 horns at the altar are 4 angels. They're not humans. They're angels. And more than likely it's these 4 right here. Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Phanuel. And they're probably the 4 riders of Revelation. The first horse rider is representing the Messiah. It's the start of the Messiah's coming. He's transferring onto a war footing. And he's putting all his enemies under his feet. That's what's happening. Business as usual. Never again after the first rapture. Everything changes. And then it shows these 4 angels were given strength, extra strength by the Almighty to seize all the other fallen angels and toss them into the abyss for the to be locked up. Okay? And the authority that is given to the beast is a land area. Okay, now most of the people in this area are going to surrender to the beasts because, you know, when they see these centurion creatures running around and all this stuff that we would say is science fiction now occurring, they're going to be shaking in their boots, and that's why they're saying who's able to make war with these things, you know what I mean? And that's why they worship them, end up surrendering, and the beasts end up enslaving them via the mark. But the people in that area will have an opportunity to join the 144,000, meaning they're going to be given the gospel and one final chance, one final opportunity to believe. But since they were unbelievers at the time of the Messiah's return and the day of redemption, because they're in the wrath, they have to face death. So for them, believing is going to mean refusing the mark and being killed. And then they carry out their commitment by having faith in the Messiah and keeping the commandments of the Almighty, just like we see in Revelation 14, which tells us how to be ready for the first rapture. The wise virgins, the wise servants keep the commandments of the Almighty and faith in the Messiah, not just one or the other. So the 42-month count begins with the alliance that Apollyon, the Antichrist, makes with the 10 horns, which is led by Satan Gog. Alright? That's when the 42-month count begins. Alright. Now, after this covenant, because what happens is we see so the 10 angels, they're princes, supervisors over this landmass right here. Because after Babel, the Almighty separated the nations with the grandsons of Noah, which was 16. And he put, just like he did in Eden, he gave them, they're referred to as princes. The Prince of Persia, Michael is the Prince of Israel, etc., etc. They're just supposed to supervise, assist, intercede, help humans. But for whatever reason, 10 of them rebel. And if I had to speculate, I would say that this area, if you took a compass and put one point on Jerusalem and then measured it out 700 miles and then made a circle, that would be the final area, which would be about the size of New Jerusalem. That's what my speculation would be. But no matter what, we know that it's only the greater Middle East, okay? Give or take a few hundred miles. And this is what the jurisdiction that the beast has over. This area right here. Alright? And everywhere else on planet Earth gets destroyed by the sixth trumpet fallen angels when they're released. When they are released, well, North, South, and Central America is completely obliterated by the first trumpet. And then, like we said in the past, the second trumpet hits the Pacific. After 5 months of the warm water and the tsunamis washing over the Antarctica, I believe that's what releases the fallen angels. But when that burning mountain hits the Pacific, all these islands, Australia, all these islands, lots of this, most of this, a lot of this, and a lot of this is all going to be destroyed. Plus we had the sixth seal destroy a bunch of stuff. And there was already a lot of death and destruction from the first 4 seals. A lot of humanity was killed by disease and war and famine. So we're talking after the beast is released and he gets jurisdiction over this area. When the sixth trumpet sounds and the rest of the fallen angels come out to destroy, I think they only really got to destroy this area right here. Everything else is uninhabitable. And the only thing that's left after the sixth trumpet is the area that the beast has jurisdiction over. And they make sure everything else is killed and destroyed. He comes out to destroy. There's no peace. No temple services. No peace. No peace treaties. It's a covenant between wicked angels. And they go and destroy everything except for this land area. And they probably use Jerusalem as a headquarter. But I don't know that for sure. So, Ezekiel 31 and Daniel 7 show us that Apollyon is bigger, more stout than the 10 horns. And it's basically showing us what we already know, that Apollyon is the dominant. He's dominant to Satan. He's dominant to the other 10 horns. And he's also the leader of the fallen angels. Okay? So the heads are dominant to the horns, is what I'm trying to say. The fallen angels are dominant over the Ephesians 6 powers, principalities of the cosmos, which are the 10 horns that get thrown down. Okay. So then we see, after the 42 months, in Revelation 13:5, excuse me. So in Revelation 13:5 is when he gets the jurisdiction to act 42 months. All right. But then when we see the empire transition from the beast of the sea to the beast of the earth, and this transition is after the mark. The beast of the earth is Babylon the Great. Okay? So when this transition occurs, then we see it says that he exercises all the jurisdiction of the first empire. Meaning that it continues. Alright? That's the continuation of the jurisdiction. Right there. So Revelation 13:5 is the 42 months, and then Revelation 13:12 is the continuation in that jurisdiction. And that transition from the beast of the sea to the beast of the earth is the mark. The beast of the earth is after Babylon the Great is created. Because now they're made up of humans also, and humans are made up from the earth. Alright? And in Revelation 14 shows us that separation. The ones who are killed for refusing the mark get reaped to New Jerusalem, which is the final rapture, the tabernacle pilgrimage. And then those who take the mark get bundled and thrown into the winepress of the wrath of the Almighty, which is the bowls, and this is Babylon the Great. Okay? And then, like I said before, then the Messiah comes down to tread the winepress at the end, which is the war of the great day, and he kills everything. Alright? There are no survivors. Everyone on planet Earth, after Revelation 14, 13, and 20, have the mark. And when the Messiah comes down, he kills them all. And then the angels bind the fallen angels and toss them into the burning fire. And then they bind the dragon, which is the 10 horns, and put them into prison. And you'll see that the 10 horns, the dragon, Satan, and his minions, they only get prison for 1,000 years. Because their crime wasn't as bad as the fallen angels. The fallen angels, not only did they rebel, but they taught humanity a bunch of junk, and they also mated with humanity. The 10 horns don't mate with humanity. They rebel after the flood, and their prison sentence is only 1,000 years compared to the 4,000 years for the fallen angels. But then they get thrown into the burning fire after 1,000 years, along with everybody who doesn't believe, or I should say doesn't take part in the covenant, who doesn't fulfill their terms of the contract in the covenant, which is Israel. Alright? And then for the people after the end of the 1,000 years, when all the dead are resurrected, the people who never had the opportunity to receive the gospel, they are judged according to their deeds. And if their good deeds outweigh their bad deeds, it says that they are gathered into the barn of the Messiah with the rest of us. Okay? So I hope this helped bring this 42 months into focus. And I hope you enjoyed the extra information concerning the days of Noah. I'm really looking forward to this weekend. I really hope something happens. But like I said, even if nothing happens, this is still good information. And something I didn't mention when I first brought up the days of Noah is that on the 17th day of the second month is when the door was shut. And this here is a Sunday. So I wouldn't be surprised if this is the weekend that something would happen on the Sabbath. Because like I said, I think the Almighty is going to use a Sabbath for the simple fact that it'll lessen the destruction, since He is so merciful. Because all of us who are obeying the commandments, we shouldn't be traveling or working on the Sabbath. So if he opens the door in heaven on that day, then it should lessen the destruction. And I may sound like I think that I'm going on the first shot, but I personally have no idea. I've been praying and doing the best I can, but I have no idea if I'm going to be accounted worthy or not. So, who knows? We'll see. Time will tell. I know it's going to be an extremely rude awakening for a lot of people and a lot of spouses. Because, like Luke 17 says, there were two in one bed, which is a husband and wife. One goes and the other stays. And I don't say that. I don't get any joy out of saying that. It's sad, but it's a cold, hard truth. And if you hear it now, it's better than finding out the hard way. And the other video that I got planned with the Gentiles, that's going to be stepping on a lot of toes. So I wanna kind of really go through a fine-tooth comb on that one. But I'm planning on releasing this before the Sabbath begins, so everybody can get to listen to it on the weekend, and then maybe I'll have the other one out Saturday or Sunday, if everything is still normal. I'm really hoping we see that open door. Alright. Until then, may the will of the Almighty be done and His kingdom come, in the wonderful, glorious name of His only begotten Son, YaHushuWaH. Take care.